The classroom air was heavy with the stale scent of chalk dust and the faint hum of the overhead fluorescent lights. It was the kind of room where time seemed to crawl, where every tick of the clock above the whiteboard echoed too loudly in the ears of restless students. At the front, the teacher droned on about equations, her voice flat, her back turned as she filled the board with looping symbols. The low buzz of whispered conversations wove through the rows of desks, a background chorus of teenage impatience. In the middle of this noisy monotony sat the quiet girl. Her posture was straight, her notebook angled perfectly on the desk, each page filled with neat, meticulous handwriting. A pencil rested between her fingers, moving steadily as she copied notes with practiced focus. She kept her head down, her curtain of dark hair partially shielding her face, her movements efficient and deliberate. She didn't glance around, didn't participate in the whispers or the fidgeting. It was as though she had built an invisible wall around herself, an impenetrable barrier no one was invited to cross. But in a classroom full of eyes hungry for amusement, that wall only made her stand out. The bullies had noticed her from day one. They noticed how she never raised her hand, how she walked briskly between classes without acknowledging anyone, how she ate lunch alone in the far corner of the cafeteria. To them, her silence wasn't strength, it was weakness, an open invitation. They tested her the way children test fences, poking, prodding, pushing, waiting for a reaction. When they lobbed paper wads at her during math class, she didn't flinch. When they hissed insults under their breath as she passed in the hallway, she didn't break stride. When they blocked her path by the lockers, she simply stepped aside without looking them in the eyes. Her refusal to engage wasn't the victory she thought it was. To the bullies, it was fuel. Each ignored jab emboldened them further, stoking their desire to humiliate her in front of an audience. They weren't satisfied with silence, they craved the show, laughter, cheers, fear. That afternoon, they sat a few desks behind her, exchanging mischievous glances as the teacher scribbled across the board. The ringleader was tall for his age, with a swagger in his posture and a smirk that rarely left his lips. He tapped his pencil rhythmically against the desk, leaning closer to his friends as they whispered. His eyes flicked toward the back of the quiet girl's head, that smooth cascade of hair that shielded her face from the world. He tilted his chin, and his friends snickered, instantly knowing what he was planning. The room buzzed with the usual background noise, but beneath it was a kind of tension, a subtle shift in the air that only a few perceptive students noticed. They watched as the boy leaned forward, his grin widening, his hand lifting slowly. He waited for the teacher to turn her back fully, for the room to be at its most distracted. His fingers hovered above her hair for a moment, savoring the anticipation, the cruelty of the act he was about to commit. And then he yanked. The sound of her sharp gasp shattered the background hum. Her head jerked back, her chair squeaking loudly against the linoleum floor. A ripple of reactions shot through the class. Stifled laughter, a few shocked gasps, the rustle of bodies shifting to see what had happened. Phones slid discreetly out of pockets, lenses rising to catch the drama unfolding in real time. The boy's grin stretched wider, his friends already chuckling under their breath, savoring the attention they'd earned with one brutal pull. For a moment, the teacher didn't notice, too absorbed in the board, chalk screeching faintly as she wrote. But the class noticed. Every eye was fixed on the girl, waiting for the outcome. Would she cry? Would she shout? Would she finally crack under the pressure? The quiet girl's breathing was uneven as she reached up, gently smoothing her hair back into place. Her pencil lay forgotten on her notebook, her steady rhythm broken for the first time that day. Slowly, she turned her head just enough to look at the boy, his hand still hovering smugly in the air. Their eyes locked. The smirk faltered, just slightly. She didn't shout. She didn't lash out. Her voice, when it came, was low and steady, a sharp contrast to the chaos around her. "Let go," she said, each word deliberate, cutting through the room like the clean edge of a blade. "Now." The boy blinked, his grin twitching, but something in her tone made his confidence waver. For the first time since this game had started, he wasn't entirely sure he was in control. The class leaned forward collectively, sensing that the moment wasn't going to end the way anyone expected. The girl reached calmly into her backpack, her hand moving with purposeful precision. The room fell quiet, anticipation thick as students craned their necks. What was she doing? What could she possibly pull out that would make a difference? The bullies expected fear. The class expected tears. But what they were about to see was something none of them had prepared for. Her hand moved with deliberate calm as she reached into her backpack, ignoring the whispers that swirled around the room. The bully still clutched a strand of her hair, smirk creeping back onto his face as if daring her to resist. He thought she was pulling out tissues to dab at her tears or maybe a notebook to swat his hand away. But when her phone slid into view, sleek and glowing under the overhead lights, the room shifted again. Every eye locked onto her. She didn't fumble, didn't hesitate. With her hair still tangled in his grip, she pressed the screen and dialed with sharp, confident taps. The classroom hushed to an unnatural stillness, the kind of silence that comes when people sense they're witnessing something irreversible. "Hello. Yes, I'd like to report an assault," she said clearly, her voice steady enough to carry across the room. The word assault landed like a thunderclap. Students gasped, some covering their mouths, others darting glances at the teacher, who had frozen halfway through writing on the board. The chalk snapped in her hand, breaking cleanly as if in sync with the tension in the air. The bully's smirk faltered. What are you doing?" he stammered, still clutching her hair though his grip loosened. The girl ignored him, her eyes fixed forward, her voice unwavering. "Yes, I'm at Roosevelt High School, Building C, Room 204. A student just grabbed me by the hair. His name is..." She turned her head just enough to glance at him, her expression icy. "Ethan Price. There are 2 others involved as well. I have their names." The room erupted in whispers. Ethan's friends shifted uncomfortably, their earlier laughter now brittle and nervous. "She can't be serious," one muttered, but even he didn't sound convinced. The phones that had been raised to catch another prank were now recording history. Ethan's face drained of color. He yanked his hand back as if burned, his confidence slipping away with every second. "Hey, come on," he hissed, his voice cracking, "you're taking this too far." "It was just a joke." Her gaze cut to him like steel. "Assault isn't a joke." The teacher finally snapped out of her stupor, rushing forward, hands flapping nervously. "Now, let's not blow this out of proportion," she began, her voice trembling as she tried to wrestle back control. But the quiet girl wasn't backing down. "No," she interrupted, holding the phone firmly to her ear. "This isn't out of proportion. It's exactly what should happen when someone thinks they can put their hands on me." The officer's voice on the other end was faint but audible. She nodded once, her tone sharp. "Yes, I'll wait here. Thank you." When she ended the call, the silence was crushing. Ethan stood stiffly, his face a mix of anger and panic, his bravado crumbling under the weight of what had just happened. The other students shifted in their seats, wide-eyed, whispering furiously. They had never seen someone turn the tables like this, not with fists, but with sheer nerve and the certainty of justice. Minutes felt like hours as everyone sat in that charged air, waiting. Ethan tried to mutter excuses, blaming her for overreacting, but no one laughed. His friends avoided his gaze, their shoulders hunched. The girl calmly picked up her pencil and resumed writing in her notebook, her pen strokes as neat as if nothing had happened. And then the sound came. A sharp knock at the door, followed by it swinging open. 2 uniformed officers stepped into the room, their presence sucking every ounce of air from the space. Conversations cut off mid-sentence, chairs squeaked as students straightened reflexively. The teacher rushed forward, her words tumbling in a panic. "Officers, this is a misunderstanding, really, just kids being kids." But the girl stood, her voice slicing cleanly through the teacher's excuses. "No misunderstanding. Those are the ones." She pointed without hesitation, her finger steady as a blade, first at Ethan, then at his 2 friends. The boys froze, eyes wide, mouths open but voiceless. Their earlier swagger was gone. The officers exchanged a glance, then stepped toward the bullies. "Ethan Price, you and you too, stand up." The scrape of chairs was deafening. Ethan sputtered, "Wait, this is crazy. You can't actually." But his protests died as one officer gently but firmly took his arm, pulling him from his seat. Gasps echoed as his hands were cuffed, the metallic click reverberating through the classroom like a gavel strike. Phones recorded every second. The scene, surreal and electric, would be shared across the school within minutes. The bullies, once untouchable kings of the classroom, were marched toward the door in humiliation, their heads ducked, their faces pale. The quiet girl smoothed her hair, closed her notebook, and sat back down. She didn't gloat, didn't smile. She simply adjusted her pencil and waited for the lesson to continue, as though this interruption had been no more significant to her than a ringing phone. But to everyone else, it was monumental. She had changed the rules. Silence was no longer her weakness, it was her weapon. And she had wielded it with precision that left the entire room shaken. The door shut behind the officers, and with it, the weight of the moment settled into the classroom like dust after an explosion. For a long, stretched-out silence, no one moved. The scrape of chairs and the shuffle of papers had vanished, replaced by a stunned stillness that made even the humming fluorescent lights sound deafening. The quiet girl, now once again seated at her desk, calmly adjusted the notebook in front of her and picked up her pencil. Her face betrayed nothing. No triumph, no anger, no smugness. Just focus, just calm. The students around her, however, were in chaos. Whispers erupted like sparks leaping across dry grass. "Did you see that? She really called the cops. They actually cuffed Ethan." Phones buzzed in laps, messages flying faster than the teacher could even think about restoring order. Clips of the scene were already bouncing across group chats, spreading through the school before the officers even reached the front doors. The teacher finally tried to collect herself, her face pale, voice shaking as she said, everyone settle down, please. This is still class, and we need to," but her words were drowned out by the wave of murmurs. For the first time in years, the teacher was no longer the authority in the room. The authority had been claimed by the quiet girl, the one who had done what no one else ever dared. Some students stole glances at her, their eyes wide with new respect. Others looked at her with unease, as though they were seeing someone they'd never really noticed before. It wasn't just that she had stood up for herself, it was the way she'd done it. Not with fists or shouting, but with a calm certainty that turned the bullies' power back onto them. She hadn't matched their chaos, she had outclassed them completely. When the bell finally rang, the hallway exploded with chatter. Students poured out, voices rising, phones held high as they replayed the video over and over. Ethan's red face, his sudden panic, the click of the handcuffs, every second was now immortalized and dissected by hundreds of curious eyes. The quiet girl walked out of the room at her usual pace, her backpack slung neatly over her shoulder. She didn't hurry, didn't smile, didn't acknowledge the stares that followed her like shadows. But she felt them. By lunchtime, she wasn't invisible anymore. Entire tables of students craned their necks as she passed, whispering furiously. Some offered her small nods of respect, others moved out of her way as though she carried some untouchable power. Even those who had never noticed her name now spoke it with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "That's her," they said. "That's the girl who had Ethan arrested." Meanwhile, the absence of the bullies was glaring. Their usual spot in the cafeteria sat empty, their laughter silenced, their swagger gone. No one dared to defend them. The story of what they'd done and how they'd been brought down spread too quickly, leaving no room for excuses. Their reputations, once cemented by intimidation, crumbled in a single morning. But the quiet girl didn't gloat. She sat at her table as she always had, eating her sandwich with the same deliberate calm she brought to everything. A few students lingered nearby, clearly debating whether to approach her. One eventually did, a girl from her math class, clutching her tray nervously. She began, voice small but sincere, "That was really brave. What you did, I don't think anyone else could have pulled that off." The quiet girl looked up, her expression softening slightly. "It wasn't brave," she said simply. "It was necessary." Those words spread almost as quickly as the video. Necessary. A reminder that what she had done wasn't about making a scene or seeking revenge. It was about drawing a line, one she refused to let anyone cross again. By the end of the day, the school had shifted. Teachers whispered in the lounge, administrators scurried between offices, and students buzzed with theories about what would happen to Ethan and his friends. But underneath it all was a newfound awareness. The quiet girl wasn't just another face in the crowd. She had become something else entirely. A symbol, proof that the loudest voices weren't always the strongest, and that silence, when wielded with precision, could be the sharpest blade of all. As she walked home that afternoon, the weight of stairs still lingering in her mind, she felt a subtle change within herself. She hadn't set out to become anyone's hero, but she had reclaimed something far more important, her own power. And though the day had been extraordinary, she treated it with the same calm as any other. Because to her, this wasn't about one dramatic moment in a classroom. It was about a promise to herself. Never again would she let anyone decide her worth. And from that day forward, no one, student, teacher, or bully, ever saw her as invisible again.